London, 1845. Beneath the gaslight glow and polite chatter of Victorian drawing rooms, a darker secret stirred in crystal bottles. It was amber, bitter, and deceptively elegant. Laudanum, the empire's silent addiction. From grieving mothers to celebrated poets, everyone drank it. Doctors prescribed it, society praised it, and the nation quietly dissolved into a dream. Behind lace curtains and marble mantels, minds slipped away one drop at a time. This wasn't rebellion or pleasure, it was escape. An entire generation living between consciousness and oblivion, where beauty and decay shared the same trembling glass. It begins with a bottle. A small, amber glass bottle, elegant, unassuming, the kind found on every English mantelpiece in the 1800s. The label reads in graceful cursive, "Tincture of opium." Beneath it, one word whispered through parlors and sick rooms alike: laudanum. For some, it was salvation. For others, damnation in liquid form. Imagine a cold London evening in 1847. Gas lamps flicker against the fog, carriages rattle over cobblestones, and behind curtained windows, England dreams in opium's embrace. From the poorest seamstress to the wealthiest widow, from poets to physicians, laudanum flowed like ink through the veins of the Victorian age. It was medicine, comfort, and vice, all in one crimson draught. They called it the sleeping friend, the quiet rest, or simply the drop. It promised to ease pain, still crying infants, calm troubled minds, and lull the grief, stricken into blissful forgetfulness. A few drops could silence agony. A few more could silence life itself. No one knew where medicine ended and madness began. Laudanum was in truth a blend of opium and alcohol, a concoction so powerful that it could numb a broken limb or a broken heart. It was sold freely in apothecaries, advertised in newspapers, and prescribed by doctors for everything from coughs to hysteria. You could buy it from a corner chemist as easily as you might buy tea. It was the secret ingredient in tonics, the comfort of widows, the muse of poets, and the cradle song of England's restless soul. But beneath the civility of its use was something far darker, a quiet epidemic of dependence spreading through drawing rooms and slums alike. England was a nation addicted to forgetting. Women were the first to fall. The polite, pale faces of Victorian wives, and mothers hid bottles of laudanum among their perfumes and powders. Doctors recommended it for menstrual cramps, melancholia, and female nerves. Housewives took it to sleep, to cope, to endure lives of silence and sorrow. It became the invisible chain of domestic life, legal, respectable, and utterly destructive. Writers, too, drank deep from the bottle. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Thomas de Quincey, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, names carved in literary gold, were all touched by laudanum's strange muse. It expanded the imagination while quietly consuming the mind. Coleridge's Kubla Khan, that surreal vision of pleasure domes and opium dreams, was born from its haze. De Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater turned personal ruin into poetry, exposing England's most beautiful addiction. But for every artist who romanticized it, thousands of nameless souls perished in silence, infants poisoned by soothing syrups, factory workers dulled to survive endless labor, mothers slipping into eternal sleep beside half-empty bottles. The drug that promised to heal the nation was slowly killing it. And yet, in those years, few saw it as evil. Laudanum was the doctor's friend, the widow's comfort, the poet's muse. It was the respectable poison, the acceptable sin. If gin was the drink of the streets, laudanum was the drug of the parlor. Elegant, refined English. No law forbade it. No sermon condemned it. No one dared to see that the empire built on industry, intellect, and iron was quietly dissolving in a red-gold haze. The great paradox of the Victorian mind was this: while it preached moral virtue and restraint, its heart pulsed with addiction. The same society that shamed women for passion sold them bottles of chemical peace. The same doctors who wrote essays on purity prescribed opium to their patients and to themselves. Laudanum didn't just ease pain, it numbed conscience. And so, in parlors filled with lace and lavender, in sick rooms heavy with perfume and decay, England's finest drank their way into oblivion, drop by drop, dream by dream. It was not the darkness of the slums that defined the Victorian drug age. It was the darkness hidden in its civility, the soft-spoken, well-dressed addiction that dripped from the bottle like honeyed despair. Because in the 19th century, England didn't fear laudanum. England was Laudanum, elegant on the surface, trembling beneath. It often began quietly, not with the wild desperation of addiction, but with the gentle clink of glass and the sigh of relief. Laudanum was never taken with shame. It was measured, deliberate, and ritualized, part of the daily rhythm of life in 19th century England. In genteel homes across London, Manchester, and Bath, small doses of laudanum were mixed into tea or wine, taken discreetly before bed or after breakfast. It was a medicine. After all, one's apothecary said so, and one's doctor approved. Even the advertisements in newspapers promised peaceful slumber and blessed relief. The ritual was almost elegant. A mother might pour a teaspoon into a porcelain cup before tending to her restless infant. A gentleman, weary from work or haunted by the anxieties of empire, would add a few drops to his evening brandy. For the elderly, it became a nightly companion, easing the ache of joints and the loneliness of twilight years. Soon, entire households lived on the rhythm of the tincture. Women of the middle and upper classes were its most faithful devotees. In an age that prized composure and modesty, emotional pain was a private burden. Doctors, largely male and dismissive of female hysteria, prescribed laudanum as if it were a cure for life itself. The symptoms: anxiety, sadness, sleeplessness, exhaustion. The prescription: a few drops of forgetfulness, and forget they did. The stifling marriages, the dead children, the unending decorum of drawing room life. Laudanum dulled grief and turned despair into a faint, dreamy calm. To appear serene was to be respectable, and laudanum made serenity easy. But beneath the surface, the drug altered everything. Minds dulled, appetites vanished, faces grew pale, eyes distant, speech slow. The same women who once fluttered through afternoon teas became fragile, ghostly figures drifting between sleep and wakefulness. Servants whispered about their lady's condition, while husbands simply ordered another bottle from the chemist. The apothecaries knew. They watched as familiar faces returned week after week, asking for just a little more, yet profit dulled their conscience. Laudanum was legal after all, and England was a nation that worshipped medicine. The poor, too, found their escape. In the dark alleys of industrial towns, laudanum was sold in cheap vials, the working man's solace, the mother's mercy, the infant's silence. Laborers numbed their pain after 14-hour shifts. Women used it to quiet hungry babies, unaware that each drop brought them closer to death. It was said that in the slums of Manchester, infants slept too soundly, their tiny lungs heavy with the mother's helper. The drug bridged classes, from silk to suit, lace to linen. Everyone suffered, everyone dreamed. Laudanum was the one comfort shared by duchesses and beggars alike. Writers, too, embraced the bottle. Thomas de Quincey, in his famous Confessions of an English Opium Eater, described the transformation vividly. Heavenly pleasures of the imagination, visions of more than earthly splendor, and then endless torment. He was both prophet and victim of the age's addiction. His confessions were not just a warning, but a mirror, showing a society too entranced by its own illusions to face the truth. Even Charles Dickens hinted at it, his characters often wary, half-dreaming, their London a labyrinth of shadows and fog. Behind the moral tales of Victorian literature lay a world narcotized by its own civility. And as the 19th century marched forward, laudanum became so deeply embedded in daily life that it no longer felt foreign. It was like tea, or brandy, or prayer, a habit both respectable and ruinous. Doctors continued to prescribe it for everything: headaches, coughs, sleeplessness, even broken hearts. Pharmacies displayed it in their windows, gleaming bottles with gold lettering that read, Laudanum, a gentle restorative. The irony was almost poetic. England, the empire that prided itself on conquering the world, had been quietly conquered by its own medicine. The addiction wasn't loud. There were no riots, no desperate street dealers, no laws forbidding the sale. Instead, it was a slow, polite decay, one that smelled faintly of roses and ether, and behind every elegant home, behind every calm Victorian smile, there was often a hidden bottle, and the faint clink of a spoon against glass. Because laudanum didn't just treat pain, it became the language through which an entire generation whispered their despair. The 19th century was an age of contradictions, a world of strict morality and secret vices, of scientific progress shadowed by spiritual decay, and laudanum, that dark elixir of dreams, flowed through the veins of its greatest thinkers and artists like a silent muse. Behind the lace curtains of Victorian civility, the drug became a key to another world, one of imagination unbound. Painters, poets, and writers who sought beauty beyond the rigid lines of reality found in laudanum, both inspiration and damnation. It was the bridge between genius and madness. Thomas de Quincey had already opened the door. His Confessions of an English Opium Eater was not merely autobiography, it was a revelation. He wrote a vision so vivid they rivaled divine revelation. I was stared at, hooted at, grinned at, chattered at by monkeys, by parrots, by cockatoos. Every form of life that could mock me seemed to crowd upon me. The book was both warning and temptation. Readers were horrified and enthralled. They could almost taste the sweetness of the opium dream. De Quincey's words turned suffering into art and addiction into myth. Then came the poets. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, whose haunting Kubla Khan was born from an opium vision interrupted mid-dream. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure, dumb decree. The poem felt less written than revealed, a glimpse into a celestial trance that only laudanum could unlock. Coleridge's addiction would later consume him, leaving him frail, guilt-ridden, and endlessly chasing that first, perfect vision. But to the romantics, his suffering was sacred. It proved that beauty demanded pain, that genius was paid for in drops of poison. Painters, too, sought its glow. In dim London studios, artists sipped laudanum as they painted, eyes half closed. Chasing the shimmer of unreality, the candlelight flickered on canvases of ghosts, gods, and feverish landscapes. It was as if the poppy had become a lens through which the world itself looked more vivid, more tragic, more divine. Even ordinary men and women felt the pull of the dream. Laudanum softened the edges of a cruel world. The rigid class hierarchies, the endless moral scrutiny, the suffocating rules of conduct. It was escape in a bottle, a rebellion disguised as medicine. And in the heart of London, in smoky parlors and shabby rooms, small circles of opium intellectuals gathered, sharing dreams, discussing death, reciting verses that blurred the line between life and hallucination. But art born of laudanum carried a curse. For every vision, there came the fall. De Quincey's brilliance turned to despair. Coleridge's inspiration rotted into self-loathing. Painters who once saw paradise began to see phantoms crawling from their walls. The muse became a tormentor, whispering beauty one moment, horror the next. The Victorians romanticized this suffering. They saw in it something noble, even holy, as if addiction were a form of artistic martyrdom. The idea that genius must destroy itself became part of the cultural myth. And so, while doctors prescribed laudanum freely, society quietly applauded those who wasted away for art. Yet beneath the poetry and paintings, the truth was far uglier. Behind every mystic vision lay hours of agony, trembling hands, racing hearts, sleepless nights of terror. Addiction was not noble, it was a slow unraveling. But the Victorian world, obsessed with appearances, preferred tragedy dressed in beauty. Laudanum turned suffering into spectacle, and despair into something almost fashionable. It was the perfume of genius and the poison of dreams. The deeper one looked into 19th century England, the clearer it became. Laudanum was not a vice of the few, but a quiet epidemic dressed in respectability. It was the secret thread weaving through drawing rooms, factories, and even nursery chambers. Everyone used it, but no one spoke of it. Behind the velvet curtains of polite society, the clink of the laudanum bottle was as familiar as the sound of a teacup on porcelain. It soothed crying infants, calmed anxious mothers, steadied trembling hands of old men, and silenced the pains that came from both labor and loneliness. The Victorians, with all their restraint and moral codes, had discovered a socially acceptable addiction. Doctors prescribed it freely, apothecaries sold it cheaply, and the public consumed it hungrily. A few drops could make the world tolerable again, could numb grief, disguise hunger, or soften the dull ache of poverty. It was easier to pour another measure of laudanum than to face the grinding cruelty of the industrial age. Women, especially, became its quiet victims. The pressures of Victorian femininity, modesty, submission, emotional restraint, pushed many into silent despair. Laudanum became their invisible ally, a nervous condition, or hysteria, as doctors called it, was often just a name for exhaustion and loneliness. The prescription, a few drops of the tincture, mixed with wine. Ladies would sip it discreetly in the evenings, their eyes glazing over as the weight of their corsets seemed to lift. They would smile again, speak softly, and drift into the hazy comfort the poppy promised. To outsiders, they were delicate and graceful. To themselves, they were fading ghosts. In poorer neighborhoods, the picture was different but just as tragic. The working class, ground down by endless labor, turned to laudanum as their only comfort. Mothers gave it to their children to make them sleep while they worked long hours. It was known as Godfrey's cordial or mother's friend, but it was poison dressed as mercy. Babies died quietly, and society barely noticed. The hypocrisy was staggering, while newspapers condemned the low habits of the poor. Aristocrats attended soirées, as where glasses of wine were laced with opium tincture, calling it a touch of refinement. Clergymen preached sobriety from the pulpit, only to sip their own dose before bed, and yet the signs were everywhere. Trembling hands at the piano, fainting spells at garden parties, half-empty bottles hidden in drawers. The empire's heart was addicted, but it beat in silence. Laudanum blurred the boundaries between the moral and the sinful. It made respectable people do shameful things, not in rage or passion, but in a slow, drowsy surrender. Letters went unwritten, promises forgotten, prayers mumbled through fogged minds. Even the great cities themselves seemed under the drug's spell. London's gaslights flickered through the smog like eyes half open in a dream. The sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones echoed faintly through streets, where half the population lived in a haze. The empire that prided itself on progress was quietly dissolving into its own shadow. Writers called it the age of soot and smoke, but it could just as easily have been the age of sleep. And through it all, the apothecaries kept selling, the doctors kept prescribing, and the world kept pretending. The Victorian dream, orderly, moral, triumphant, was in truth a dream bought on credit, paid for in drops of opium. The question now was not who used laudanum, but who didn't. The 1850s, the dream was beginning to crack. Behind the elegant facades of London and Bath, whispers turned into alarm. The newspapers, once content to praise medical progress, began printing cautious editorials as England drugged. Doctors, too, were starting to see the truth. Their miracle cure had become a curse. In hospital wards, they noticed patients who could no longer function without their daily drops. Women fainted when deprived of their medicine. Soldiers and factory workers trembled when their bottles ran dry. Withdrawal, a word few yet understood, was dismissed as madness, weakness, or divine punishment. But those who watched closely saw the same thing. England was addicted. The first warnings came from the doctors themselves. Dr. Thomas Trotter wrote that laudanum, though a blessing in pain, was the most treacherous of comforts. Dr. George Still, an apothecary in Manchester, recorded that nearly 1 in 5 prescriptions contained opium, but the public didn't want to hear it. Addiction was a word reserved for the poor, not for the refined, not for mothers or poets or gentlemen. The hypocrisy deepened. The same society that scorned the gin drinkers in East London turned a blind eye to laudanum decanters in Mayfair parlours. It was the respectable addiction, odorless, graceful and silent. A spoonful in tea looked nothing like vice. Writers and artists began to tell the truth that others wouldn't. The English essayist Thomas de Quincey, in his haunting Confessions of an English Opium Eatus, 1821, had already peeled back the curtain. He described the ecstasy of his early intoxication, the visions, the pleasure, and then the nightmares that followed. His words spread like wildfire, shocking and fascinating the public. But even then, most saw it as literary drama, not a warning. They called him eccentric, a man who had flown too close to his own imagination. De Quincey's nightmares, however, were real. He wrote of walking through dream cities where eternity pressed down like a weight. He dreamt of being buried alive beneath a sea of faces and waking with his heart racing, desperate for another dose. His book became both confession and prophecy. England, too, would one day wake to its own horror. Meanwhile, reformers were stirring. The temperance movement, which had first fought alcohol, began to notice the other spirit haunting the nation. Pamphlets appeared with titles like "The Poison in the Cupboard" and "Mothers, do you know what you give your children?" Preachers thundered against moral decay, blaming laudanum for everything from sloth to sin, but even they unknowingly carried small flasks in their coat pockets for their nerves. In the working class districts of Liverpool and London, the first public health officials sounded the alarm. They reported shocking mortality rates among infants given opium mixtures, deaths listed simply as failure to thrive. In 1857, a coroner in Nottingham declared that England's children were dying of peace. The government began to take notice, but slowly. There was no law against laudanum. It was not smuggled or hidden. It was sold openly, alongside soap and tobacco. Even children could buy it for a few pennies. The apothecaries grew rich, and politicians looked away. And so the nightmare deepened. By the 1860s, entire towns were described as stupefied. Housewives who once took a few draughts consumed whole ounces. Workers would spend their wages not on beer, but on bottles of brown liquid. The fog over England's cities seemed thicker, not just from coal, but from the collective sleep of a people half dreaming their lives away. Yet for every addict, there was a defender. Laudanum had saved lives, eased unbearable pain, and soothed the dying. How could something so merciful be evil? How could a cure for suffering become the source of it? The debate divided medicine, church, and parliament alike. And beneath all the arguments, the same truth lingered. England did not want to wake up. The dreams were too sweet, the pain of reality too raw. The empire that ruled the seas was losing the war within itself, one drop at a time. If laudanum was England's quiet disease, then its greatest minds were its most elegant victims. The same brown tincture that sedated the poor also fueled the imaginations of poets, painters, and philosophers. What began as medicine had become a muse, and 19th century England's art would forever bear its mark. It began in the drawing rooms of London's literary elite. Laudanum flowed as freely as ink. Writers spoke of it with reverence, calling it the friend of thought, the window into the soul. A few drops could still the chaos of the mind, slow time itself, and summon visions that seemed divine. The poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote Kubla Khan under its influence, a dream interrupted by the mundane knock of a visitor, a vision lost forever to the waking world. He called it a fragment from paradise, What he didn't say, at least not publicly, was that paradise came with chains. Coleridge spent much of his life trapped in the cycle of relief and remorse. His creativity bound to a bottle that dulled both pain and purpose. His letters later trembled with guilt. I am a slave to the accursed habit. Artists too found themselves in its thrall. Painters of the pre-Raphaelite circle, those who sought to capture beauty, untouched by modern corruption, were often visitors of Laudanum's dreamscape. They painted women like ghosts, pale, ethereal, eyes half lidded in longing. The canvases shimmered with melancholy, their beauty tinged with something mournful, almost narcotic. It was as though the entire aesthetic of Victorian art had become intoxicated, beauty seen through smoke. The line between medicine and madness blurred completely. Doctors prescribed laudanum for melancholia, a term that encompassed everything from heartbreak to artistic temperament. It was common for creative men to write under its influence, praising its lucid calm. But that calm exacted a price. The same drug that opened the mind's gates also corroded them. Memories slipped, focus vanished, and dependency grew. Letters from poets and novelists began to carry the same tremor. Confessions of sleeplessness, trembling hands, despair. Yet they kept using it. For many, it was no longer about relief. It was about maintaining the illusion of inspiration, of control. And then came the nightmares. De Quincey's English opium eater had already described the terror that lurked behind the pleasure, the monstrous dreams, the feeling of drowning in time itself. He spoke of immense architecture rising in his sleep, of endless corridors where his soul wandered lost. These weren't just hallucinations. They were metaphors for the age, the labyrinths of progress that trapped their own creators. Writers began to see themselves reflected in the drug's dual nature. Laudanum, like the empire, promised control and expansion, but beneath it lay decay. The Victorians believed in progress, in science, reason, and moral order. Yet their greatest minds were seeking escape from those very ideals. It was as if laudanum became the dark mirror of the age's ambition. The same intellects that built the modern world were desperate to forget it, to dissolve into dreams where no factories roared, no moral codes suffocated. Laudanum offered that forgetting in liquid form. In smoky studies and lamplit parlors, England's dreamers drifted between worlds, writing of angels while slowly turning into ghosts. The poets of the Romantic Age became prophets of oblivion, singing hymns to beauty while their bodies withered. The Victorians, proud of their restraint, found themselves enslaved to desire. It wasn't just addiction to a substance, it was addiction to escape. And perhaps that was the true tragedy of laudanum. It didn't simply numb pain, it numbed awareness. It made people content in their suffering, complacent in their decay. By the late 19th century, the effects were everywhere. The novels grew darker, the poetry more despairing, the art more unreal. The age that had begun with industry and reason was ending in dreams and death. Behind every painting of pale beauty, behind every haunting verse, behind every trembling genius, there was the same small bottle, unmarked, half empty, gleaming amber in the candlelight. Laudanum had not only altered England's body, it had rewritten its soul. By the 1870s, the medical world could no longer pretend. Laudanum, once hailed as the crown jewel of medicine, had turned on its masters. Doctors began to see their patients, genteel men, delicate women, and soldiers alike, fall into the same trance, the same craving. The cure had become the disease. Hospitals across London and Manchester began quietly documenting the phenomenon they dared not name. Morphinism, opium habituation, laudanum dependency. There were no textbooks, no guidelines, only shame and confusion. One physician wrote despairingly, "It is a malady of the will, not of the body, and yet the body dies of it." Doctors were supposed to be healers, but many had become dealers in elegant poison. Apothecaries who once sold laudanum by the gallon now spoke of responsible dosing. yet their windows still glimmered with bottles. For every addict they tried to cure, 10 more came through the door, smiling politely, asking for their usual tincture. Withdrawal was hell. Without laudanum, patients suffered sweats, tremors, delirium, and visions. They begged for sleep that would not come. Nurses described them as burning from the inside out. Many relapsed simply to end the torment. There was no methadone, no modern substitute, only agony and guilt. And still, the prescriptions continued. Laudanum was everywhere because it worked. It dulled the pain of childbirth, eased the dying, silenced the wounded. The same doctors who condemned it couldn't stop using it. They wrote of their shame in medical journals. Why administer salvation in drops and damnation in doses? Public panic soon followed. By the 1880s, newspapers began running sensational stories. Society ladies in the grip of the poppy. Mothers poison their infants with Godfrey's cordial. The tone was moralistic, blaming women, the poor, or foreign influence. Anyone but the system that created the epidemic. It became fashionable to demonize the user rather than the drug. Artists and writers were portrayed as degenerate dreamers. Working class mothers were called negligent. Yet no one dared attack the apothecaries or the medical profession directly. They were too respectable, too powerful. England needed its laudanum. To sleep, to work, to forget. In private, doctors began experimenting with cures. Some tried cold turkey withdrawal, locking patients in dark rooms for weeks. Others replaced laudanum with morphine injections, believing the precision of the needle would control the craving. Unaware they were replacing one addiction with another. There were even water cures. Clinics by the sea where the afflicted were made to bathe, fast, and pray. Most patients emerged weaker, trembling, their minds still haunted by the drug's call. The few who recovered spoke of it like a near-death experience. One anonymous diary, written by a woman from Bath, reads, "The world returned to me slowly, as though from underwater. The sun was too bright, the hours too long. I felt the weight of reality press upon me, and I longed again for the sweet, merciful dark." Her words captured the dilemma of a generation. Once you've known oblivion, how do you return to the world's noise? Even as science advanced, morality clouded the issue. Addiction was not yet seen as illness, but as weakness, a failure of character. The upper classes called it melancholy. The clergy called it sin, and only a few dared to see it as something deeper, a wound of the soul inflicted by an unfeeling age. By now, Britain's empire spanned the globe. India, China, Africa, and everywhere it went, opium followed. The very drug destroying levs in England was the same one it sold by the ton to the east. The hypocrisy was staggering. England condemned addiction at home while profiting from it abroad. The doctor's hand and the merchant's hand had become one. Laudanum had become a mirror of the century itself, brilliant, powerful, and fatally self-deceived. In the polished wards of London hospitals, in the shadowed alleyways of the East End, and in the opulent parlours of the elite, the same truth whisked through the smoke. England could conquer the world, but it could not conquer its own craving. And somewhere between medicine and sin, science and superstition, a new word was being born, one that would define the next century: addiction. By the 1890s, the golden haze that had once enveloped England began to fade. The laudanum bottle, once as common as bread and tea, was slowly becoming an object of shame. The country that had built an empire on opium was finally beginning to fear its own reflection in the glass. The change did not come from science alone. It came from scandal. When quiet dependency became visible, when aristocratic daughters, beloved poets, and respected clergymen began wasting away, the moral guardians of society struck back. Newspapers that once romanticized the drug now called it a sickness of the soul. Illustrations showed women with hollow eyes and trembling hands, cradling their bottles in despair. The fallen angel became the new symbol of the age. The press coined new phrases: the Laudanum lady, the slave of the tincture, and victims of the vial. Every article dripped with judgment and fear. Addiction was no longer just a private shame, it was a social crisis. The same polite society that had quietly indulged for decades now sought to erase its own guilt through moral outrage. The government moved cautiously. Parliament could not afford to alienate the medical community or the merchants whose wealth flowed from the poppy trade. But as the cries grew louder, the first tentative restrictions appeared. The Pharmacy Act of 1868, once a mild attempt at regulation, was finally enforced with teeth. Laudanum could now only be sold by licensed chemists, and its bottles required warning labels. Poison. It was a small step, but symbolically enormous. The mask was cracking. Doctors began to write in hushed tones about opiomania. The word carried weight, both medical and moral. Addiction was no longer a private failing, it was a contagion. Hospitals opened their first recovery wards. Grim, underfunded places where the addicted were kept in seclusion, their screams muffled by stone walls. But even as England sought to cure itself, it continued to poison others. Across the seas, in the treaty ports of China, British ships unloaded their cargoes of opium with imperial pride. The same government that condemned laudanum at home fought wars to protect its right to sell it abroad. The hypocrisy was staggering. At home, the poppy was a vice. Abroad, it was a commodity. Missionaries returning from China brought back horrifying tales of smoking dens and wasted lives. The irony was lost on few. England was seeing its own ghost across the ocean. The reflection of its own addiction magnified. The moral panic gave birth to reform movements. The late Victorian period was a time of crusades against alcohol, prostitution, and now opium. Christian reformers published pamphlets warning of the devil's draught. Women's groups spoke out against the destruction laudanum wrought in their homes. Physicians wrote to medical journals, urging the government to act before England became a nation of invalids. Yet even as reformers marched and moralists raged, the demand for oblivion remained. The industrial world was louder, harsher, more demanding than ever. Poverty, isolation, and loss had not disappeared, and though laudanum bottles grew harder to buy, new forms of relief replaced them: morphine injections, cocaine tonics, and later, heroin. Humanity's craving for escape merely changed shape. Art mourned the passing of the age. In the twilight of the 19th century, the poets of the fin de siècle, the end of the century, generation, wrote of decay and desire. They sensed that something was ending, not just a century but an illusion. Writers like Oscar Wilde, Aubrey Beardsley, and the aesthetes of London's salons spoke of beauty as an act of rebellion, of indulgence as a form of art. Behind their words, the spirit of laudanum still lingered, the fascination with dreams, the love of escape, the seduction of destruction. By 1900, laudanum was fading from the shelves, but not from the blood of England. Doctors replaced it with newer, safe derivatives, unaware they were birthing the next wave of addiction. The poppy had simply changed its costume. And so, as the new century dawned, the age of brass and steam gave way to the age of morphine and medicine. England had woken, but only half. The dreams remained quieter, regulated, bottled behind glass. The laudanum age ended not with revolution, but with resignation, a sigh across the empire, as if the whole nation had finally sobered from a century-long dream. But its ghosts would remain, in the trembling hands of widows, in the ink of poets, in the archives of hospitals, and the margins of diaries. The shadow of the tincture endured. England had survived laudanum, but it had been forever changed by it. When the last drops of laudanum dried from England's shelves, it did not vanish, it transformed. The story of the poppy had not ended. It had merely evolved, slipping silently into the bloodstream of modern medicine. What Victorians called a gentleman's solace had become the foundation of something darker and more systematic. the science of addiction. By the early 20th century, as doctors tried to distance themselves from the sins of the past, they began studying those very sins under microscopes and in asylum wards. The word, addiction, once absent from polite vocabulary, now appeared in medical journals and psychological treatises. What had once been whispered in shame was now analyzed, categorized, and classified. The moral failure of the addict was becoming a medical condition, and in that quiet shift, the ghosts of Laudanum began to shape modern thought. Hospitals that once punished users with confinement now experimented with treatment. The first clinics for morphia habitus appeared, attempting to wean patients off the drug with reduced doses or chemical substitutes. Ironically, many of these treatments used newer opioids, like heroin, a cure, more dangerous than the illness itself. Doctors called it progress. But history, once again, was repeating itself. Pharmaceutical companies saw opportunity. The same business instincts that had driven Victorian chemists now fueled an industry far more powerful and global. Morphine, cocaine, and eventually synthetic opioids like codeine and oxycodone emerged. Each marketed as safer, more scientific, more modern. The glass bottles changed shape, the labels became cleaner, but the promise was the same: relief, peace, escape. In the laboratories of Germany, the United States, and Britain, chemists continued the poppy's evolution. When Bayer introduced heroin in 1898, it was proudly sold as a non-addictive substitute for morphine. The irony was almost poetic, a century of suffering reborn as innovation. Meanwhile, the cultural echo of Laudanum refused to die. Writers, artists, and musicians of the early 20th century continued to draw from the same well of dreams that had intoxicated the Romantics. The languid decadence of Baudelaire's artificial paradises, the haunted verses of Thomas de Quincey's Confessions, the surrealism of early cinema, all bore the fingerprints of Laudanum's legacy. It was as if the drug had seeped not just into the veins of its users, but into the bloodstream of Western imagination itself. Psychology, too, was born from its ashes. Sigmund Freud, himself a user of cocaine, wrote extensively about the pleasure principle, the human drive to seek relief from pain. Behind his theories lay the same questions the Victorians had wrestled with in silence. Why do humans chase numbness? Why does comfort destroy as easily as it heals? And can the mind ever be truly free from its cravings? These questions, born in the opium dens and parlors of the 1800s, became the foundation of modern psychiatry and behavioral science. In literature and film, laudanum became myth. Victorian heroines trapped by circumstance often reached for the small brown bottle, the symbol of both despair and defiance. Sherlock Holmes' morphine syringes, Dr. Jekyll's transformative potion, and even the fainting tropes of Gothic novels all echoed the same truth: England's fascination with intoxication had never truly ended. By the mid-20th century, historians began to re-examine laudanum not as a scandal, but as a mirror, one reflecting the anxieties of an age caught between faith and science, morality and medicine. What emerged was a portrait of a society desperate for control yet powerless against its own yearning for escape. The Victorians were no different from us. They simply lived in slower times, with fewer distractions and deeper silences. Their bottles were glass and cork, ours are plastic and prescription. Their chemists promised relief from melancholy, ours promise relief from anxiety. The tools have changed, but the desire remains eternal. The laudanum bottle became a symbol, fragile, beautiful, dangerous, a warning and a temptation. Its liquid once shimmered like amber in candlelight, now its shadow lingers in every pill, every vial, every craving humanity has ever tried to justify. The age of laudanum may have ended in the 19th century, but its echo continues in hospital wards, in pharmaceutical boardrooms, and in the quiet moments when pain feels unbearable and sleep will not come. Because in the end, laudanum was never just a drug. It was a mirror, showing us what we fear most, that the line between medicine and poison, between healing and destruction, is as thin as a drop of tincture in a teaspoon of water. The world has changed beyond recognition since the 19th century. Carriages have become cars, telegrams have become smartphones, and Victorian England has long faded into sepia photographs and museum exhibits. Yet one thing remains hauntingly familiar: our dependency on chemical comfort. In the soft glow of modern hospitals, under the sterile light of pharmacies and clinics, the ghost of laudanum still lingers. It hides behind new names and cleaner packaging: oxycodone, hydrocodone, fentanyl. The bottles are child-proof now, the labels printed in sterile fonts. But the promise whispered by each pill is the same one the Victorians once heard: this will make the pain go away. The story of laudanum is not an antique relic, it's a reflection in the mirror of our modern age. The Victorian housewife soothing her grief with a teaspoon of tincture is no different from the modern worker reaching for a prescription after a sleepless night. The motivations are the same: to dull the ache of living, to silence the noise of thought, to forget for just a moment. History doesn't vanish, it mutates. When laudanum disappeared from the shelves, it didn't end. It evolved into a trillion-dollar industry. The pharmaceutical revolution, born from good intentions, carried within it the same seductive danger, the illusion of control over human suffering. And like the chemists of the 1800s, modern companies sold hope in bottles, their advertisements echoing Victorian charm, calm tones, trusted faces, the reassurance that your doctor knows best. But just as the Victorians discovered, relief has a price. The modern opioid crisis, spanning continents and claiming millions of lives, is the direct descendant of that same golden liquid once poured into crystal glasses by candlelight. What was once the elixir of elegance is now a global epidemic. The difference lies only in scale and speed. The desperation that once drove poets and mothers, soldiers and doctors to the comfort of laudanum has not disappeared. It has simply found new vessels. Today, the poppy fields still bloom, their sap harvested not in apothecary jars, but in industrial labs. The addiction that once crept through London's parlours now runs through cities worldwide, from American suburbs to Asian ports, an invisible empire of dependency. And yet, the cultural allure remains strangely intact. Hollywood, literature, and music continue to romanticize intoxication. From rock stars to writers, the idea of creative genius bound to addiction still fascinates the world. The tragic brilliance of the suffering artist, the genius who burns too bright. It's the same myth that haunted De Quincey and Coleridge, repackaged for a new century. But behind the myth, there is silence. The same silence that once filled Victorian bedrooms when the bottle ran dry. Modern medicine, for all its progress, still grapples with the same moral paradox. How do you heal pain without creating new suffering? How do you comfort the mind without enslaving it? It's a question the Victorians never truly answered, and neither have we. In small towns across the world, quiet pharmacies now serve as modern gin palaces, not filled with laughter or smoke, but with prescription slips and whispered pleas. The transaction is the same: give me something to forget. And still, the bottle wins. The parallels are chilling. Where laudanum once ruled the drawing rooms of England, today opioids rule the modern household. Where Victorian society judged addiction as moral weakness, modern society dresses it in the language of disease. But the shame remains. We have changed the words, not the wounds. In a sense, laudanum never died. It lives in every chemical escape, every substance that promises to take the edge off. It lives in the human need to smooth the sharp corners of existence, to transform unbearable reality into something dreamlike. The Victorians drank their pain in amber tincture. We swallow ours in white tablets. And both generations, in their own ways, are haunted by the same illusion: that relief can be purchased, that peace can be measured in milligrams. Yet, perhaps the true legacy of laudanum lies not in its destruction, but in its revelation. It forced humanity to confront the fragility of its own mind, to see that suffering is not merely physical, but deeply spiritual. It exposed how easily comfort becomes captivity. As the 21st century moves deeper into its pharmaceutical age, we are still wrestling with the question the Victorians first posed under flickering gaslight. What are we willing to sacrifice for the promise of relief? In the end, the story of Laudanum is not about a bottle. It's about the human soul, desperate, brilliant, fragile, forever reaching for the next dose of oblivion. And somewhere, in that quiet space between pain and peace, the ghost of Laudanum still whispers. Its voice is faint, but familiar. Drink and forget.